And we are recording on Sunday, November 19th, 2023 at 11:29 a.m. Eastern Time with Mr. Ray McGovern. You can go to his website in the description. Let me make sure I have it right. RayMcGovern.com, McGovern.com, because I know your son always tells you to make sure to plug it. So I did the job for you, and
Thank you.
I've now brought great shame to your son. I've beat him to the punch. But Mr. McGovern's been on here several times before. You worked for the Central Intelligence Agency for some time, and today I kind of just want to hear your thoughts on all things Israel, Hamas. Um, what is the overall takeaway for this? What are your thoughts on this? What are your opinions on this that maybe aren't what everyone else has perceived?
Well, Tommy, let me start out with a question I got the day after the attacks by Hamas on Israel. It was from a young college graduate woman, Miriam, and she said, "Mr. McGovern, can you tell me what's going on in Israel? I mean, keep it brief. I don't have a lot of time, but could you? I don't understand what's going on." So I tried to keep it brief, Tommy, but I couldn't. I wrote about 5 or 6 paragraphs. I said, "Dear Miriam, when I was 9 years old, 1948, living in the Bronx part of New York City, there was great rejoicing at a wonderful event that had just happened. Israel, the persecuted Jews had been given their own homeland. There was incredible rejoicing. There were parades. It was a big thing. I was only 9. I remember that, okay? But I also remember that no one told me that there were people already there, like they were called Palestinians, and they lived in a place called Palestine, and 750,000 of them ended up being expelled from this place where they lived to make room for this wonderful new Jewish state. My God, I didn't learn that until I was in my 20s, okay? And even then, people didn't emphasize it, certainly not in the mainstream press. So, how do you account for this? I mean, well, here's the deal. Guilt. Now, we all Irish Catholics are really familiar with guilt, right? But put
Original
that
sin.
aside.
Yeah.
Put that aside. It's an American phenomenon as well. Now, did policymakers feel guilty about how we, America, acted during World War II? The answer to that is yes. Why? Well, in the first instance, and I recommend a book on this. It's by Doris Kearns Goodwin. It talks about Roosevelt and Eleanor talking about these things and how things went down before the war in Europe. And the Jews were already being persecuted, right? Most people knew that. Certainly FDR knew that. And Eleanor was beside herself. She said, Franklin, you got to take these people in. They're being killed, for God's sake. They're being gassed. And Franklin said, "Sorry, Eleanor, I'm not gonna do that." And she says, "Why?" Now he didn't tell her this, but the reality was, it was not a politically smart thing to do to let a bunch of Jews into the United States. Talk about anti-Semitism.
Mhm.
Well, there it is. Okay, there's no denying there was rank anti-Semitism during those years. Now, I worked in intelligence, and I know that there were photos, not from satellites. Satellites hadn't been invented, but there were aerial
Yeah.
photos taken by our plane, right,
Of
of
the
those
death camps.
concentration camps.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we knew damn well what was going on. We didn't do much
You
about
didn't.
how
Yeah.
the Jews were being persecuted. So, uh, Do you have a guilty conscience about that? Well, you should if you're a human being. Okay, so that was adds to the guilty conscience, of course, of the Germans, which is even worse, whether they're Catholics or Lutherans. They feel justifiably worse. So there's this deal that, oh yeah, we'll give the Israelis their own state. Of course, the British were, the prime mover behind this, having occupied that territory for a long time. And so that's what happened. And when the Palestinians came into view, well, they didn't come into view for very long because they were just completely ignored. And most of the people in Gaza now are direct descendants of those people pushed out of Palestine in 1948, a long time ago. What's that, 75 years? You do the math, okay?
70, yeah,
So,
75.
so that, so I said, dear Miriam, that's part of it. The other part is that many Jewish people, as well as Israeli, talking broadly, they really think that God, well, let's put it this way, that God is a real estate agent, and that he said, well, let's push the Palestinians out, and we will promise the promised land to the promised people. I mean, the special people. And let me give you a little, I'm from the Bronx, right? Well, we give, for instances, right? I'm going to give you, for instance, I'm on the West Bank with a group of a little group traveling there. And we're going to have an interview with one of these settlers on the top of a hill. Now, it was classic. It was alabaster walls with this little mini city on top of this hill. The only problem was that after we got off these autobahns, these highways that only Israeli cars are allowed on, we had to go up off to this little exit where there was this impoverished Palestinian village. Dank poverty, no running water, no nothing. Okay. Before we got into this little road to go up to the mountain. So we go up to the mountain and we're hosted by a rabbi from Cleveland, Ohio. Okay. And he's bragging about all the great things that they had up here on this alabaster city. And I noticed out the window there's a sprinkler going along, and the grass was just like the best golf course you could imagine. And so one of my associates said, now we noticed that down at the bottom of the hill there was no running water. You have really nice grass up here. How do you account for the fact that you have sprinklers going with pure water, and there's no water down at the bottom of this Palestinian village? And the rabbi, without batting an eyelash, he says, look, he said, God promised us this land, the land of milk and honey, a land which should be ours. So, yeah, that's the answer. Deuteronomy 15:4, if you want to check it out in the Bible. Now, Tommy, I haven't studied the Hebrew scriptures to the degree I have the Christian scriptures, but I do Deuteronomy 15:4. And what I do was this rabbi quoted only the first half of it. So I said, Rabbi, how come you only gave us the first half of Deuteronomy 15:4? He said, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? I said, you got the Bible right there. Read the whole verse. So he said, all right, you would have Yahweh said you should have this land so that there should be no poor among you. I said, say that again. So there should be no poor among you. Whoa. Well, Rabbi, that sounds like a deal. I mean, like, we could call it a covenant. I mean, so you're giving this land so that there should be no poor. What about those poor down at the bottom of the thing? Well, he he went really quickly downhill from there. We left early. Okay, we left that splendorous grass there with the sprinklers. So there you go. There are Israelis that really think that only the first half of, to put it bluntly, only the first half of Deuteronomy 15:4 applies, And that's come even more into vogue now, where Netanyahu himself is citing the worst parts of Hebrew scriptures, the parts where say, anybody attacks us, we got to not only decimate them, we got to ethnically cleanse them, we got to kill them all. Okay, now let's just fast forward here from 3,000, 4,000 years ago, and find out what happened after Israel was given this land and wanted to enlarge it. Does that sound familiar to you, Tommy? Sort of like the
Manifest
Germans call it
destiny. Oh,
Lebensraum.
I was
Okay,
gonna say
Leben.
manifest destiny. U.S.
That too, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, you could go back to what we did
sure,
to the Native
sure.
Americans. So, Lebensraum is just what the Germans
Living
call it. It's
space.
Raum, room for living, more room for living. Okay, so in 1967, and I was on active duty, so to speak, with the CIA as an analyst in those days, Israel decided to attack Egypt and Syria and have some more Lebensraum and take over parts of Syria take over the West Bank. West Bank is the part of Israel now to the west of the Jordan River, and Gaza, okay, and the Sinai. Now, I didn't know for a long time that the Israeli pretext for doing this was what the British call rubbish. In 1982, so to do the math, 1967, they did this. Just to finish up with 1967, November 22nd, 1967, the United Nations Security Council condemned what the Israelis did unanimously 15-0 and said Israel must pull its forces and its control out of the occupied territories. 1967.
Is there any
Do the math.
significance to using JFK's assassination date, or no?
Well, we can. I'd like to tie that in a little bit later,
Okay.
but what was that? That was 68, right? Now we're 63. But let's talk about that later. The
Okay.
point here is that in 1982, so 1967, UN resolution, the Israelis thumbed their nose at it. And of course, we supported the Israelis. So did the Germans. Guilt, well, that was part of it. A beachhead against the Russians, that was part of it. A battleship equivalent in that part of the Middle East to protect our oil, yeah, that was all part of it. But so 67 now, 1982, Menachem Begin, former Israeli president when a lot of this stuff was going on, he appears before an audience in Washington, D.C., and he says, it's time that we should be honest. We weren't being threatened by those Egyptian forces in the Sinai. No, we'll be honest. We decided to attack them. It wasn't like they were going to attack us, and so that's the way it went down. Now, the New York Times printed part of that speech, that operative part, but nobody took notice, and nobody put any pressure on Israel to do what the UN Security Council unanimously dictated they do, that is, give back the occupied territory. They did a deal later with Egypt where they gave back the Sinai, who was a whole pile of sand, right? Gave back the Sinai, but they kept the West Bank, Gaza, and part of Syria, the Golan Heights. So that's sort of like the historical record from 1967 when they had the Lebensraum. And now, of course, more recently, about a year ago, if memory serves, the Israelis were just betwixt and between. They had like 4 governments in 6 months. And finally, Bibi Netanyahu comes into the fore and says, okay, I'll cooperate with the most extreme rightists and we'll form a new government. and we'll do what has to be done. Okay. Now, there were warning signs that these guys were really, really extreme. I mean, quoting the Bible and quoting other, to justify what they were doing to the Palestinians, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. I've been in the West Bank. I just told you a story about what the West Bank is like with those settlers up there and the alabaster cities and the Palestinians down below. I went back to the West Bank a couple of years later, about 6 years ago, with a Veterans for Peace delegation, and there were about 9 of us. Luckily, all younger than me, all bigger than me, and all with experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, when they watched what the settlers were doing to the inhabitants of the West Bank, I can tell you it was very traumatic for them, because as 2 of them admitted, that's what we did to the Iraqis. That's what we did to the Afghans. Anyhow, at one point we were staying in a little village called Nabi Saleh, a very famous village in Palestine because of their resistance to the occupation. They just would not bow their heads, no matter how many of their sons, uncles, fathers got shot by rifles from the settlers, okay? So we decided we would go and have a little meeting at a spring in Nabi Saleh, from which these Palestinians used to get their water, but was pretty much cordoned off by the settlers. And we were attacked in such a manner that I've never been attacked before. The settlers arrived, one of them in a car. Others came in, and the first thing they did was punch out our women. Okay, punch out our women. Now, there was one Marine, okay, Special Ops Marine from Afghanistan, from Iraq. Mike Haynes is his name. He was with our delegation. And as soon as he saw the settler punch out this woman, she was a press representative, he ran over to help her, and the guy punched him out. And you know, I know Mike, he could have handled this guy real easy, right? But he just came back here, you know, and later I said, Mike, why did you deck that guy? He said, Ray, you were in Army infantry, right? In the Marines, we learned the first thing you do is see if they're armed, right? Every one of those settlers had either a sidearm, a couple of them had shotguns or rifles, okay? So that's the reason this guy lived to exist another day.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying here is this is so brutal, so out of the ordinary. We never experienced it before. The settlers felt what they could do, what they wanted to do. The Israeli troops finally came and protected protected the settlers. We wandered back up to Nabi Saleh. That's when the rifle shots started. Like I know what a rifle shot is, but my guys from my friends from Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, told me, "Hey, Ray, you know that's a rifle shot, right?" So, yeah. So put your head down, please, Ray. Roll a little bit, you know. So anyhow, that was our experience later. That was just 6 years ago. Nabi Saleh is now under attack. Some of those people have been kidnapped. Some of the people with whom we stayed. And so that's the other part of it. Getting back to, or getting fast forward to just this year when this hard right coalition took shape, it was just awful what they were doing. And one of the things they tried to do was change the judiciary in Israel so that Netanyahu himself could evade prosecution for all kinds of bribery, extortion, and everything else. It's on the books. He and his wife, just like Menendez in New Jersey, he and his wife, guilty as sin. And, you know, if he leaves power, he's going to be prosecuted and he could end up in jail, just like Menendez can be prosecuted and end up in jail. So what I'm saying here is there's a personal problem here. Netanyahu can't afford to lose this thing. And he's got this extreme rightists, okay? And so what does he do? In reaction to what Hamas did on the 7th of October, he mounts what the equivalent of a genocide. Do not blanch before that word. It's carefully outlined in post-World War II documents, okay? Genocide is genocide. Do you have to kill 6 million people? No, you don't. You don't have to kill a whole ethnic group. You can kill maybe just 2 million. That's how many former refugees from Israel and Palestinians are in Gaza. So, what we are witnessing now is what happened to the Jews in Germany, and our guilt complex and our calculation about what we need to do to protect our big battleship, namely Israel, against the people who might interfere with the oil that we think we should have, and other strategic considerations. We are supporting Israel. Now, the last thing I'll say here is something that I was listening to a tape. John Mearsheimer, who is the dean of the Realist School of Political Science.
I've tried to get him on here so many times. I can't get him on.
Well, I'll tell him.
Please do.
Listen to Tommy. Yeah. He's one of my friends now. We've appeared on YouTube. Actually, the only time I got over 1 million views was when Mearsheimer and I talked together at a Committee for the Republic conference right after Putin had decided to go into Ukraine. Anyhow, he was shunned, ostracized. He is the foremost advocate of the realist school of political science, or I guess more properly called international relations. Now, McGovern has a problem with there's a realist school. Now, what are the other schools? My God, Anyhow, I didn't realize that I was a part of the realist school of international relations, even though I had practiced this art for 27 years as a reporter, as an analyst for the CIA. And, it was good duty. I was able to report what I saw, interpret it, what I thought about it, the analysis, and give it straight to the president as long as my supervisors thought I was on the right track. There was no prostitution. There was no corruption of intelligence from 1963 until about 1981, when Bill Casey and Bobby Gates came in and made sure that nobody could be deceived, but that the Russians were just as bad as they always were. They would never give up power peaceably. Anyhow, that's a long story. But so I was at the realist school, even though I didn't know it. Now, Mearsheimer was, as I say, shunned, but now he's appearing on videos, and even one or two of his speeches made in Norway or in Italy are appearing on YouTube. Okay, so I watched this thing just last night, and he says, I've been around a while, and he sure has. He's almost as old as I am. Okay, so he says, look, there's a unique thing in history, and that is that Israel and that the United States and Israel are joined at the hip. His phrase, in a unique way that no two countries ever in the history of the world, the known history, have ever been joined at the hip. He says, this goes for U.S. policy, which has full support for Israel, quote, no matter what. Okay. No matter genocide? My God. That's what's happening, folks. Now, Blinken, the Secretary of State, he goes off to the Middle East and acts like a clown, trying to get the president of Egypt. You say, here's the deal, President Al-Sisi, here's the deal. We worked it all out, okay, with the Israelis. We've got this plan. We're going to drive all the Gazans down south and then into the Sinai. Asking your permission, of course. Well, we got lots of money. We'll pay for the tents. We just put them there for a while, and then maybe we can persuade Ireland. Good try, folks. Ireland's not going to be part of this stuff. Maybe we can persuade Brazil or some other countries to take these people. Reminder: these people were there in 1948, right? Okay, so that was the deal. So he goes to El-Sisi and says, "Now, of course, we'd have to have your buy-in here because it's a Sinai. You have the Sinai." And El-Sisi reams him out in front of the camera, and the readout says, "El-Sisi emphasized we should have an immediate ceasefire, and for his part, Secretary Blinken said it's really good to keep communication channels open." And the next couple of weeks, there was more of this fiasco. So the situation now is so dire that the main question is, how long the Arabs, how long the Turks who aspire to be leaders of the Islamic world, how long the Syrians, how long the Iranians are going to watch as their co-religionists, or most of them, Islam of faith, are decimated, are ethnically cleansed, are subjected to genocide. I just don't know the answer to that. But so far, I have not been impressed. The Arab foreign ministers got together in Saudi Arabia just about a week ago. It was very impressive because you had Iran represented at a very high level, Saudi Arabia at the same meeting. Yeah, at the same meeting. You had the head of Syria and the head of Turkey at the same meeting. Yeah, at the same meeting. So the optics were great, and I had fully expected them to use the economic weapon that they used in 1973, the last and only other time where the Arabs actually inflicted an initial defeat on Israel. They used the oil weapon. You, Tommy, are too young to remember waiting for 3 hours to get a half a tank of gas at $9, $10, whatever it was in those days. So they have that weapon.
Yeah.
But they have other equities. And I think when push comes to shove, it will have to be the Palestinian populations. There are tens of thousands of them in Saudi Arabia, elsewhere, Jordan, for God's sake, Lebanon. How long it will take for those people to say, look, we're not going to put up with this great big strategic planning you guys are doing. You got to do something. You got to do. If you don't do it, we're going to join the equivalent of the Republic, the Spanish Republic brigades that went in there to fight against previous ethnic cleansing, previous genocide. I don't know how long that's going to take, but each week the genocide continues. The U.S. is again joined at the hip in the most despicable way with what's going on there. They're even repeating Israeli Hasbara, the propaganda. You have the president of the United States saying 40 Palestinian infants were beheaded. My God. He said, oh, I saw the pictures. No. Yeah, he saw some pictures. Yeah, the Israelis gave us some pictures. So we're going by what the Israelis tell us. It's a very unhealthy situation. And I think the first step we need to make is to make sure that people listening to this podcast and people listening to other media that are telling the truth say to themselves, well, my God, what am I going to do about that? Am I going to sit back and like Franklin Roosevelt say, well, nah, I'm not going to do anything about this. Last thing here, Eleanor Roosevelt, to her great credit, the more I learn about that woman, the more gutsy she becomes, in my view. You know what she did? When one of these ships carrying Jewish refugees from Germany arrived off the coast of the state of Virginia, okay? And she couldn't get Franklin to give him permission to emigrate, to just come ashore. She had false passports made for each and every one of those folks and gave it to them, and they disappeared into the state of Virginia. Now, lots of lots of Jewish descendants there in the southern part of Virginia to this day, okay? Nobody knows that, but that's what a justice-seeking person did and should do. Last thing I'll say is this. I have a lot of degrees in Russian studies and I guess the realistic school of international relations. I also have a certificate from Georgetown University in theology. Certificate. It's sort of like a gentleman's master's. You don't have to write the thesis.
Yeah.
Now I learned a hell of a lot about the Hebrew scriptures. I knew the Christian scriptures pretty well. But I told you about Deuteronomy 15:4 already. I learned also that this Abrahamic tradition, okay, for those of you who are a little rusty on this, that means Jewish, Hebrew, Christian, and Islam, all from the same book, okay? Now, the point I'm trying to make is that there's one thing in common, all these three faiths. And the way I usually put it is that the Yahweh of the Hebrew scriptures, Jesus of Nazareth, and the prophet all emphasize just one thing in their writings and in their talkings and their speeches, and it is that we do justice so that there will be no poor among you, okay? One thing I learned, which was very telling, and I'll never forget it, there was a word for justice in the pre-Aramaic language, pre when Jesus of Nazareth lived, the old Hebrew. It was the word for justice, and it was ditka. And what did it mean? What was his denotation? I'm talking connotation now. The word for justice meant showing mercy to the poor. Ditka, showing mercy to the poor, like the people down at the bottom of that hill in the Palestinian village, okay? Now, Jesus of Nazareth, of course, talked about justice. He said pretty much, look, if you don't do justice, forget about the rest of the virtues. Justice to the widow, to the orphan, to the refugee. That's what we're all about. And as you may know, Tommy, I come out of a Catholic tradition. There was a time when the American Catholic bishops, this was after John the 23rd appointed these bishops. He was a really good guy, okay? We named our first son after John the 23rd, 1964, okay? So what he did was appoint these good bishops. And what these bishops did was face up to the economic injustice in our country, the U.S. Catholic bishops. And what they said was, look, we're going to tell you what tzidkah, what showing preference to the poor means, okay? It means, quote, no one is entitled to accumulate still more of what he or she doesn't need when other people lack the bare necessities of life. Okay, suffice it to say, that's Jesus of Nazareth to a T. The prophet? Why is Hamas so popular? Why did they win hands down in 2005, 2006? Because not only because the Palestinian Authority was corrupt after they killed Arafat, but because Hamas abides by this Abrahamic tradition. They have hospitals, right? They have places to feed people. They take care of their own. They show mercy to the poor. Tzedkah. Now, they do lots of other things too. Now, are other things that they do, like this horrible raid on the 7th of October? How does one feel about that? Well, I would say that those things don't happen in a vacuum. Now, my friends would say, oh, so you're justifying that? No, American intelligence analysts don't justify things. That's not their job. They try to explain why they happen. And we could come back to this if you want, but after 9/11, it was quite clear what happened, in my view. The 9/11 Commission, I used to have the book right back here. Don't see it. Don't see it now. But on page 147 of the 9/11 Commission, it was reported that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind 9/11, had been captured. Now, I was watching all this very closely, and some of my former colleagues at CIA were working on the 9/11 Commission report. And they most very naturally said, "My God, they got the mastermind. Please, we know a lot about him. We know that he studied at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. That actually he has a engineering degree from Greensboro. Oh, maybe he had an affair of the heart that really went bad, or maybe they call him a towelhead. Yeah, that may be it. To call him a towelhead. Yeah. So they said, ask him why he did it." Very understandable question, right? So the CIA says, "No, you can't ask him why." "We'll ask him why he did it." So they ask him, what did he say? Here's the report, the 9/11. I've committed this sentence to memory. Look it up. It's on page 147. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was motivated not by any incident that happened to him while he studied as a student at University of North Carolina, Greensboro, but rather by his own admission, by his intense hatred for U.S. foreign policy favoring Israel, period, end quote. Think about that, okay? Then there's a little footnote. Almost forgot. A little footnote. You go to the bottom page. Oh, this is what Ramzi Youssef, who happens to be Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's nephew, said when he tried to knock down the Twin Towers in 1993.
Yeah.
When he was condemned, when he was sentenced to like 154 years in max security, he said, "I did it. I'm proud I did it because of my intense hatred for U.S. policy favoring Israel and the things that it promotes, the things that it allows to fellow Palestinian, fellow Islamic, fellow people in my part of the world." So, so just to wind this thing, I'm sorry to be so long-winded.
It's good.
If Americans don't buy tit gach, if they don't think justice is the most important thing, I think our forefathers did, okay? But if they don't buy that, well, how about self-interest? And we have the FBI worrying now. Oh, will we have other attacks from the likes of Hamas? Well, folks, it's altogether likely because when you have no tanks, you have no drones, this is what you do. It's called terrorism, but it's understandable. I mean, it's if you're a realistic school of political science, you understand the reasons for these things, and that does not mean you justify them. But without understanding the reason for these things, they're going to keep happening. Sorry, Tommy, over to you.
No, that was brilliant. I'm actually gonna give it right back to you. I've drank like 2 of these today. I really need to use the restroom. I'll be back in like 1 minute, Mr. McGovern.
No, take your time, but turn your mic off.
No, it's fine. It's 2 rooms over.
Oh, that's right. See, when I do that, I have to turn my mic off.
No, it's good.
I'll explain that to you later.
Okay. Well, again, guys, go to raymcgovern.com, and I'm just gonna leave it up. I'll be right back.
All right. Yeah. Tommy said that my son, who runs actually created my website and populates it, and has made it unbelievably searchable. Okay, you can search on things. Okay, he always says to me, "Now, Dad, tell your interviewer beforehand, make sure that he mentions our website RayMcGovern.com. And Dad, always remember to add this little codicil, okay? And that it is, if you don't get it, you don't get it. Now, I've been prompted to add that codicil in the past, but I'm far too humble, too modest to mention that now. And so I can use this little interranium, this little we call it the halftime in basketball, to tell you that. But I'm sure that Tommy will delete it as soon as she sees it. Now, I wish that this were more of a dialogue. I would love to hear what's going through your mind. Uh, I I tend to think that you would have lots of questions, especially some of the stuff that I've deduced that I believe are factual facts, like not alternative facts. But I'm not at all sure that I've convinced you, persuaded you. And if we dialogue a little bit more, I think I could. And I hope that you'll be interested enough to ask me brutal questions. As a matter of fact, I'm going to suggest to Tommy that before we go on again, and I hope we do this, hope he asks me back, that maybe he solicit questions from you, his audience, to see what you're really interested in. And, the most brutal questions, how could you work for the CIA and do all those terrible things and pretend to be speaking truth? Well, that's a long story, but you can understand it, I think, if I told you about that. And maybe I'll tell you about that next time. Tommy, I've been talking to your audience here,
You've done well.
shamelessly advertising my
Good.
website.
No, good. That's
But
what
I
you're supposed to do.
but I avoided saying what my son always tells me to say, if you don't get it, you don't get it. No, I didn't avoid it, actually. I said that.
Um,
Call me shameless.
no, it's what you're supposed to do. And I always tell people, I'm like, when I go to the restroom, I'm like, plug your stuff. It's um concerning terrorism, and I completely understand what you're saying. It doesn't mean condoning it, doesn't mean justifying it, but you have to understand it, right? To just put our head in the sand is stupid. You have to understand why they're doing it. It's asymmetric warfare. I mean, really, it's what we did against the British. We didn't have their navy, we didn't have their munitions, but what we could do was hide in the woods and ambush them. Right? They called it terrorism, but it's really what it is. It's asymmetric warfare. It's right throwing sand in the eyes of the enemy. It's any means to win. Doesn't mean
That's
justifying it,
right.
but it means understanding why they do it. So, in that light, I mean, there's two ways to really boil it down, I suppose. I would say to really extrapolate, I would say it comes down to belief in belief in God. It's if you don't believe in that and you believe that this world is all there is, then the only natural end you can come to is it's a zero sum world. And like terrorism, you don't have to justify it, but you can understand it. You can say it's us or them, or in the school of belief in God would be that this world isn't all there is, and you can't reside in the camp of it's a zero sum game, and thus something needs to be done. But what is there to be done? I mean, is it us or them, or is it bigger than that? Is it no, this is going to continue to happen so long as we continue to use the aid, the relationship, the actions we have for Israel and what that does to the Muslim world. Are we just looking at a 9/11 and October 7th? Are we just looking at that till the end of time? Is there anything to be done?
Yeah. Well, that's the big question, of course, Tommy. So let me begin by addressing the first part of your question. Uh, what I've been saying here about the Abrahamic tradition, in my view, all it does is give you an extra reason to believe that justice is the premier thing we should be aiming for. I gave a speech out in Berkeley, about 15 years ago about torture, and I made a big point of saying, as a Christian, the guy I try to follow imperfectly, but I really try is Jesus of Nazareth. And he was tortured to death, right? Okay. Well, I was staying with a very wealthy agnostic on the top of the hills behind Berkeley. And terrific guy. First time I met him when he agreed to put me up there. Okay. And after I was finished, he said, "Now, Ray, I'm really happy to hear about your justice stuff from the scriptures and all, but you don't have to be a believer, for God's sake. Torture is beyond the pale. Every human being knows that torture is wrong. So, go a little more lightly on this Christian and Abrahamic stuff. Every decent human being knows that torture, that genocide is wrong." Okay, so I just want to temper that with that thought.
Sure.
It is, it is
Yeah, you
kind
don't
of
need to
possible.
believe. You can just know in your heart that it's wrong.
That's
It's a
exactly
good
right.
point. All right.
Yeah. So, and I keep learning. I'm a pretty old guy, but when I have these opportunities, I never stay in a hotel unless I absolutely have to. I mean, incredible people, incredible people. Anyhow, the rest of your question is, what do we do? Well, the answer is what we don't do is nothing. We are complicit in this. Our country is giving Israel the wherewithal to do genocide. It's as though back in World War II, we were giving Hitler the wherewithal to exterminate the Jews. Now, that's an overstatement. We weren't doing that. We were giving a lot of our rich people were funding some of those stuff, the gas and all that stuff, but that's just too much of a stretch. But we are giving Israel without our help, without Joe Biden going to Netanyahu calls him up and says, "Joe, I need your help. Can you come here?" And Joe says, "I'll be on the next plane." And he is. And the next thing you know, his Secretary of State is saying, "Look, we're focused." His words, "We're focused on making sure that Israel wins militarily." Secretary Blinken a month ago. His words. Whoa. Well, where's justice in this equation? Where is the propaganda that justifies this stuff? It's all over the media. Now, the media is beginning to change a little, but how many tens of thousands of Gazans have to perish before we stand up and make this thing impossible to continue? I live in a little dwarf, a little town. Now, it happens to be the capital of North Carolina, but it's a small little town, okay? And we had 4,000 demonstrators just Thursday, with most of us garbed in Palestinian garb. And we were demonstrating. On Saturday, we took the streets, okay? And the cops were very, very accommodating. And the Veterans for Peace, big truck that says ceasefire now, Veterans for Peace. Every time I went by this demonstration, there were howls of applause. Okay. Now, if we could do that in a small little dwarf like Raleigh, North Carolina, that can be done elsewhere, and it is being done elsewhere. Was that enough? Probably not. I think we need to put our bodies into it. Okay. I think we need to do the kinds of things that are necessary when injustice is so blatant and things like genocide are being enabled by our country, to get up and say, no, we're not going to do this. Now, is this an easy fight? Of course not. There is inordinate influence by the Israel lobby on the media, in academia, in think tanks, and above all, in Congress.
Yeah, AIPAC.
Yeah, AIPAC. I'll give you another for instance, okay? There's a dynasty in Michigan Many of your listeners will remember Carl Levin, uh, senator from Michigan, head of the Armed Services Committee for many, many years. Big deal in the Democratic Party. Okay. Now his brother is Sander Levin, and he's kind of old now, but he used to be the representative from the Ninth District of Michigan. Now, when he retired, his son, what's his name, Andy Levin, uh, inherited pretty much that seat, very safe Democratic seat. Okay, and for I think 2 or 3 terms, he's. But you know what he said? He said, Israel has every right to exist. It's just that if they exist in the manner that they're existing now, without giving Palestinian any rights, they're doomed. Okay, so I'm all for Israel, but I'm for Israel in the sense that if they don't recognize the handwriting on the wall, there's no security for Israel. That's the kind of security I advocate for Israel. Well, AIPAC comes in. He's running neck and neck with this woman, okay, and Andy Levin. And up till the polls say they're neck and neck on election day, Andy Levin loses by 20 points. Yeah. How'd that happen? Simple. The Israel lobby entered with all kinds of money in a primary. No,
Hmm.
this is not just a general election. This is a primary, okay? And they made sure that their candidate, who doesn't speak about any Palestinian rights or any necessity to take in Palestinian wishes or expectation, she won hands down, 20 points, okay? So there's just one manifestation of how powerful the Israel lobby is. Let me go back to Mearsheimer. I was listening to Mearsheimer, as I said last night. Now, he and Stephen Walt, a political scientist of the realist school, teachers at Yale, no, Harvard, okay? So he's a pretty big deal, okay? He and Mearsheimer wrote a book in 2006. It was called The Israel Lobby. Here's the backstory. They were commissioned to write an article about the Israel lobby, and I forget who it was, something like the Atlantic, some big magazine. And so they did. And when the editors read it, they said, "Oh my God, I'm sorry, we can't publish this." Okay. I said, "Why?" Well, we just can't publish it. So they went to the London Review of Books. Now, to their great credit, the London Review of Books published this very factual article. It wasn't biased or any way. I mean, uh, Stephen Walt is Jewish. Mearsheimer, well, he's not Jewish. He's from Brooklyn, like I'm from the Bronx. So you can tell it by his accent. Anyhow, they couldn't be accused of anti-Semitism. Well, of course they were. So what happens? Well, all hell breaks loose, and so I hear about this article, and luckily I print it out, and I go on a plane. I'm going to make a speech in Missouri, Springfield, Missouri. And it was really neat because the people who arranged the speech arranged the biggest church hall in Springfield, Missouri, 300 plus people there. Okay. And I'm talking about Iraq. I'm talking about what just happened. The year is 2006, right after the article was published in the London Review of Books, which I printed out, which I read on the plane. Okay. Now, what happens? Well, in the Q&A, somebody raises their hand and says, "Now, Mr. McGovern, have you read Stephen Walt and John Mearsheimer's article in the London Review of Books on the Israel lobby?" And I said to myself, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for my printer. Thank you for my airplane ride. I just enough. I'm a slow reader, right? But I read the damn thing." So I said, "Yes, I have." And then the question, follow up, "What did you think of it?" And I said, "Well, I thought it was a really courageous thing, except for one thing." And the question, "So what was that?" I said, "Well, the whole essay an explication, an explanation of how powerful the Israeli lobby is. I find it factual and very instructive, but they left out the best proof. Just what was that? I said, the USS Liberty incident.
Mm.
And then I looked at these 300 faces and I said, how many of you know about the USS Liberty? 3 hands go up. Now, 3 hands out of 300. Do the math.
1%.
Well, that's how many people. Okay, so I picked the guy in the front and I said, sir, can you tell me what you know about the USS Liberty? The guy stands up, sharp as straight as a rod, and he says, Sergeant Bryce Lockwood, U.S. Marine Corps, member of USS Liberty crew, sir.
Oh, shit.
Well, that's what I said, not aloud. I said, oh, wow.
Mm.
So, Mr. Lockwood, would you be willing to come up here and just explain what happened? Sir, I have not been able to do that yet, sir, but I would like to try this evening. Please come up. He comes up. And he explains how he was head of the Marine contingent on the USS Liberty, which was an intelligence collection ship of the most sophisticated kind, just offshore in international waters, just off the Sinai during the 1967 war. June 8th, 1967, reconnoitered by Israeli aircraft and then shot to hell by Israeli aircraft early afternoon, napalm all over the deck, okay? And three
And then gunboats.
3 gunboats shooting. One of them got a torpedo right midships. So,
for everybody listening, author James Bamford, who writes a lot about the NSA, I think it's Puzzle Palace, is where he does a whole chapter on it. And it's the most in-depth chapter I've ever read on the USS Liberty. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think it's Body of Secrets.
Body of Secrets. You're right. I was trying to think of the other one. I was like, I wasn't sure if it was Puzzle. I think you're correct.
This one came later, and Bamford has a really good explanation. I mean, we knew that the Israeli pilots radioing back to Tel Aviv, but this is an American flag. This is an American ship. Do your duty. Follow your instructions. Blam, blam. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, just for people who don't know the rest of the story, there was one really courageous Texan sailor. His name was Halbardier, Terry Halbardier. Okay, I've met him. I know him. He's since died. He goes up to Captain McGonigal. Captain McGonigal, sir, I'd like to connect that radar. Remember that radar we couldn't, not radar, but that little communication thing that we couldn't connect? The Israelis have shut up all our other communication things, but that one we couldn't connect. I think I can get that connected if you give me permission, sir. And McGonigal says, so, all right, Halbaji. So what are you gonna swim across that napalm? How are you gonna get across that deck? Sir, I'd like to try. Permission granted. Halbaji with some bailing wire. You know, you Texans, sailors have their own version of what we in the infantry used to call a field expedient, So this is a ship expedient. It takes this wire, connects that one communication device that they had, sends out an SOS, which of course the Israelis intercept, and they say, oh, we better get the hell out of Dodge, which they do. They break off the attack immediately, okay? The U.S. Navy, who is monitoring all this, sends aircraft from two aircraft carriers to do battle with whoever was attacking their ship, U.S. naval ship. And they're called back by President Johnson and McNamara. Why? Because we don't want to embarrass our ally, Israel. So getting back to Springfield, Missouri, I say here, the Israelis learned that they could literally get away with murder,
Mm-hmm.
murder of U.S. armed forces,
Mm-hmm.
and we would cover it up, which is what, to their eternal discredit, the U.S. Navy did. Covered it up.
Yep.
And so you had, what, 34 naval personnel killed, including those Marines that were in that one. That's where the torpedo hit.
Yeah.
And Bryce Lockwood is explaining to the audience how he had to go in to this place, which was filling up with water, and see if there were any alive Marines. He got two of them, right? And then just as he's getting the third of them, the hatch closes. And he banged on the hatch, and he finally gets somebody open. He couldn't get the third guy up. He watched him wash out to sea.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's Bryce Lockwood explaining that. And I was saying, oh, my God, this is providential. This is why I'm in Springfield, Missouri.
Yeah.
Suffice it to say that Bryce and I go back a ways now. That we took part in a award ceremony for Terry Halibadier, the Texan sailor that I talked about just now, that got the SOS out. When he was given, I think it was a Silver Star, the next to the highest Medal of Honor, being the highest, by a young congressman in California for whom Terry Halibadier worked. And I think it's worth mentioning that this congressman's name was Devin Nunes.
Mm. Interesting.
So the U.S. Navy covered it up. Everybody else covered it up. But Devin Nunes, out of respect and to honor this person who prevented the rest of the crew, there was a crew of 300, okay?
Yeah.
Besides the 34 killed, there were 170 plus wounded.
Mm-hmm.
So here's Nunes saying, I don't care about the politics of this. I'm going to give Terry Halibadier an award, and he gave him the. So I was there. I learned about it. I took the next plane out there, and it was then over lunch that I learned from his comrades and from Terry what it was like to be told to cover this up, not to even tell their wives about this under pain of court-martial. You talk about PTSD, man.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to alumni, so to speak. Talk to the former crew members still alive of the USS Liberty on June 8th, 1967. So what I'm saying here is that Mearsheimer was recalling his book last night, and maybe it was 2 days ago, but I was watching it last night. I was like, my God, it brings back all kinds of memory, because having read his article and being asked about it led to this friendship with Bryce Lockwood, U.S. Marine Corps. Well, not retired, battered, PTSD'd, having to live with, trying to scoop out the Marines under his command on the USS Liberty. These folks have been damaged for life, and the U.S. government will never rehabilitate them. Why? Because of our friend Israel. And if I haven't said this already, this is what Mearsheimer said that really struck me. He said, the relationship between Israel and the United States is unique in the history of mankind. Never before has one country felt that it would support the other country no matter what. Mearsheimer's words. So here we go, supporting Israel no matter what, the what being ethnic cleansing, collective punishment, and worst of all, what's the word? Genocide. Genocide. From gens, the Latin word for tribe or people or race. Side, homicide, killing. So killing a race. And doesn't have to be 6 million, folks. 2 million is quite enough. Actually, a part of an ethnic group under more recent legislation after World War II qualifies as genocide. I'll say one more thing, and while it occurs to me here, people say, well, Israel has a right to defend itself. No, not in Gaza. Why do I say that? Gaza is under international law, under UN resolution, occupied territory, okay? Sort of like France back during World War II,
Mm.
occupied territory. Now, do we think that the Nazi or the Vichy regime in France had the right to defend themselves against the French resistance? There weren't too many of them, but they were brave as could be, the French resistance. So, do we say the Nazis occupying France had the right to defend themselves against the resistance? No, we don't say that. And after World War II, the legislation, the international law was refined to this extent where no one can claim that Israel, the occupying power, has the right to defend itself from the occupied people striving for justice, striving for their rights. Israel does not have the right to defend itself from them, no more than the Nazi regime in Vichy France had the right to defend itself from the resistance. So
Mm.
resistance is resistance. It gets really messy, but you have to understand these things if you're going to deal with them. That's my take on understanding that part.
Yeah, I mean, not surprising at all, right? There's no easy answer. And that is something to always remember is the USS Liberty. And you can really see the parameters of just how far, like you said, that unique relationship goes. It's not just it's not allies through thick and thin. It's covering up our own. It's like the joke about Dick Cheney. He's so intimidating that he shot a guy and the guy he shot apologized, right? But think about that. They knowingly, an NSA communications show knowingly attacked our ship and killed 34 of our men, and we covered it up.
Yeah, Tommy, there are certain benefits to having the color hair that I have. Okay. Now there are downsides to it too. When
Nonsense.
when people go to the CIA and say this guy McGovern, uh, he didn't really head up the Soviet foreign policy branch. He wasn't really part of the SALT negotiation. He didn't help the SALT the ABM treaty to be. Nah, uh, he didn't brief president. Well, yeah, all right, buddy. Look, he's old. He doesn't know anything anymore because he doesn't have access to classified
Mm.
information. Okay. Now, most people don't realize that when you're dealing with a problem like Russia, like Ukraine, or like Gaza, like Israel, classified information can be a real help. It can fill in
Bro.
the cracks. But in my day, 80% of the information you needed to make cogent judgments on the Soviet Union was in open sources.
It was in the
You had to
news,
keep
yeah.
real close track of what the Russians said. And if they said something different the following day, that was a story you could. So anyhow, for people to dismiss me, he's old because he doesn't have any classified. I'll tell you one more little, for instance. My job was to analyze Sino-Soviet relations when they were at their worst. They were firing at each other across their riverine borders. Okay, 1968. My portfolio went from 1963 to 1970, and then I became head of this whole Soviet foreign policy branch. Anyhow, when I looked at all that stuff, and I said, "Wow, this is going to last forever." These guys really hate each other. Now, what did I? Yeah, there were lots of people saying, "Well, McGovern, for God's sake, this is just a clever ploy. They're both communists, for God's sake. You, they're taking over the world together. They can't." So one point where classified information really came in handy was when Very early on, uh, satellites collected information along the Russian border, the Soviet border with China. Okay. Now, in those days, they'd take the imagery and then they'd drop a capsule into the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
The US Navy would to pick up the capsule, hopefully before it hit, but usually after it hit. But it's a waterproof capsule, right? Then rush it to Rochester. And a lot of my friends would run up, take the next plane to Rochester, pour over this stuff. Well, this happened one time, and a friend called me and says, Ray, you're going to be really happy at what we just found. I said, what'd you find? Well, Ray, in a word, we found 15 highly equipped Russian divisions on the Chinese border. 15. Later, it became 40, 40. That's when Kissinger and Nixon said, we can take advantage of this by playing China off against Russia. And they did very artfully, and I was part of that too. Now, what am I getting at? Well, I'm getting at that this color here allows you to remember lots of stuff. And if you have a little bit more mentis than non-compass mentis Biden has, you remember 1973. I mentioned it before. What's that? That's the last time the Arabs attacked Israel with any measure of success. It was pretty bad the first couple of days until we came in with lots of support. And finally, Israel gave them a real bloody nose. Now, why do I mention that? Right after that, there was the oil weapon, where, as I mentioned before, we were really hurting here economically because of the price of oil. But Kissinger and Nixon got together and said, we got to prevent this. I mean, the Arabs are going to do this again. I got an idea. Let's have a defense treaty, a mutual defense treaty with Israel. That way the Arabs are never going to try this kind of thing again. Okay, let's try it. Now, I know people who are involved in this, people checking this out, for example, with the Saudis. This will be okay with you. In those days, we try to cover all the bases. Anyhow, this was broached to the Israelis. Now, most people think that Israel is our ally. Not so. To be an ally, you need to have a mutual defense treaty, like NATO, or a bilateral one, like the one we have with Japan, okay? There is no mutual defense treaty between Israel and the United States. And here's why. When we broached it to the Israelis, late 73, 74, their reaction, oh, isn't that sweet? Oh, that's so thoughtful. And we understand your reasoning, but thanks, but no thanks. Okay, now try to figure out why any country in this world would refuse to have a mutual defense treaty with the United States, at least back in the 70s. Okay, well, the Israelis didn't explain it this way, but they would just as soon have had it in the conditions which already existed, where if they want to hit out at Syria or at Jordan or at Lebanon or Egypt, they don't want to have to ask for permission. I mean, under a mutual defense treaty, it's sort of de rigueur that you say, well, we're going to start a war with, or we're going to hit out at Syria. So we just want to let you know, they don't want any part of that. Okay. They liked it just the way it was. Okay. And so they said, thanks, but no thanks. We got what we want now. We have this unique in history bilateral relationship. We don't need any defense treaty. And besides, we don't want to be encumbered by any mutual obligation to let you know when we're going to go after Syria, for example. We'd much rather be able to say we're sorry rather than to ask for permission. We're going to ask for a little bit of forgiveness, which is easy in coming. So, hello, Americans. Israel is not our ally. That's a misnomer. Now, we have lots of bilateral stuff, okay? But that's an important point. Now, during this same period, there were more jocular people saying, well, the best way, the best way to support Israel would be to, why don't we make it the 51st state? And the answer to that was, no, that would never work for Israel. Why? Well, because then they'd only have 2 senators.
Huh.
That's a sick joke, folks.
No, that's a good joke.
A very sick, but telling joke. So anyhow, this
Well, that's how you know
relationship.
the accuracy of a joke is how sick it is. No, I mean, really, a joke should make you squirm a little bit. That's a good one. Then they'd only have 2. That's brilliant.
Well, it's when I say sick, I just mean that it's just so distressing
Well,
to
it's so
see how the
distressingly
Senate,
accurate.
how the Senate and the House are so bought and sold, not only by Israel but by the arms
Sure.
manufacturers. I'll just say one more thing. When President Biden got up right after October 7th, and he said, "Look, we want more military aid, more arms going to Israel and to Ukraine." Um, Now, it's a lot of money, a lot of money, but bear in mind, this is all our money because Lockheed and Raytheon, he didn't name the defense contractors, but he said, these would be our industries building these things, our industries getting the proceeds of it, our states getting jobs. We have arms things and all the jobs. So, we all knew this before, Tommy, but here he is.
It's out in
Here
the
he is
open.
saying it, right? And 2 days later, if memory serves, the Senate Armed Services Committee convenes. And I was able to watch that whole damn thing, 3.5 hours on C-SPAN. And every one of those senators made precisely the same point. This money, yeah, it's a lot, but it's all really coming. It's our money, and it's going to create jobs. And our defense industries need to be reestablished because of all these threats from Ukraine and from Palestinians and all that kind of stuff. So, I was just pretty sickened because there was only one senator, Chris von Holland from Maryland, who made any sense at all and did not mention that, oh, yeah, we got lots of jobs in Maryland. So, I mean, how crass is that? So you got not only this unhealthy relationship with Israel, but you've got, was it 3.8 billion with a B dollars worth of arms going to Israel, half of it coming back here to our own defense contractors. I don't usually quote the Pope, Catholic though I still am, but he had one thing right. Francis gets a lot of things right. He's a better Pope than the others, okay? So what do you say? He's invited to address Congress, the representatives, the senators, joint session. Oh, everybody likes the Pope. Go to Pope. He comes in, and they're all there. They're all there. They got to show up, okay? So the Pope's there. And what does the Pope say? He says, I want to tell you what the major problem in the world is. And you know what it is? It's the blood-soaked arms traders. That's what it is. Now, what happened, Tommy? All these guys got up, women, men, yeah. And then they looked in their pockets to see if the last envelope from Raytheon was there, or maybe it fell out when they were or this one from Lockheed. It was giving hypocrisy a bad name, Now, I wish the hell the Pope followed up on that. I mean, it's not enough to make one speech, but Catholics should know. Well, people who look up to the Pope should know that when he made that point, it was completely dissed by people who have the control of the arms trade. After all, they appropriate the money to the arms makers and the arms traders, and the arms traders sell the weapons to and then the arms manufacturers get that money and they put it in the campaign coffers of the congressmen and the senators, and the congressmen and senators get reelected, and then they appropriate more money. Hello, is this a great country or what?
Makes me think of it seems almost like a an accurate but still bad perversion of, forget who it was. It was one of the Apollo astronauts. Somebody was like, we spent so much money on this program, on going to the moon. We spent all this money on the moon. And he goes, we didn't spend a dime on the moon. We spent it in the United States with education programs, with engineering, with jobs. And that's correct, right? Every penny was spent here. But that was for exploration to the moon. It
That was
applies with military industrial complex of, hey, we are quite literally, we see this war and we're going, hey, it's a lot of jobs. It's like, hey man, that's not even the unspoken part now. We're just straight up saying, hey, what, 500,000 Ukrainians ground to pieces, they're gonna need more javelins. It's like, this is evil. It's just this is, and I say this with the American flag behind me. This is evil. It's evil.
Yeah, it's not only that, Tommy, but the world has changed. There's been a tectonic shift in what the old Russians used to call the old Soviets, uh, the international correlation of power. Okay, used to be the U.S. after World War II. It was especially the U.S. after the Soviet Union imploded in 1990 or thereabouts. Now it's no longer the U.S. But the problem is Biden, stuck in the past, thinks that the U.S. is still not only exceptional, but indispensable. Words he used in that speech that I just mentioned about a month ago. Now, I used to wonder. Now, does Biden really think that? I mean, he's educated in the law. Frankly, that doesn't tell me much. Okay, is he well enough educated to still believe that the U.S. is exceptional and indispensable? He actually, well, while I was wondering that, I read an account of a small meeting in Maine. He was up there sort of campaigning. This is about 6 weeks ago now. And it's a very accurate rendition of what he told these people in a small living room. And he quotes Madeleine Albright. And he said, she was a great Secretary of State. And it was she that coined the word indispensable. That's what we are. We're the city on the hill. We're indispensable. We're exceptional. And we just have to lead. We have to lead. Okay. Now, he said that in private, as I said. So I got to thinking, my God, this old guy must still believe that. Okay. And then he said it in public, 10th or so of October, just a month ago. So these guys are stuck in the past. And the past has gone past them. The future has gone past them. Now, Xi Jinping, he comes to San Francisco to just see if this guy, Biden, is compos mentis. Talks to him, makes an incredible speech. Xi Jinping says, look, we Chinese don't invade other countries. We've got not only centuries, we've got millennia behind us. We favor what we call a win-win situation, not a win-lose situation. And, we're sensitive to our interests in the Pacific Ocean. And he didn't say it this way, but I'm thinking of the old Western. Maybe you're too young to have grown up with Western movies, okay? And there's this guy who always says, "I don't know if this town is
No,
big
big
enough for
enough for
both
the
of
two
us."
of us.
Okay, so what happens is here's Biden saying, "I don't know if the Pacific Ocean is big enough for both of us, China."
Mm,
Just illusional, okay? So what am I saying? I'm saying this is what he kind of believes. And so despite all the attempts by feckless but well-intentioned people like Blinken on China, at least, to get Joe, look, meet with him, listen to what he says, tell him your concerns, but for God's sake, be nice, okay? What happens is exactly after the meeting adjourns, he goes, "I'm going to have a press conference," and he's the president, and somebody says, "So you still think he's a dictator?" Of course, he's a dictator. He's a commie. Now it's just like he's saying, "It's a Chi-Com, for God's sake. You know what a Chi-Com is?" Before your time, Tommy, Chi-Coms were Chinese communists, and
mhm.
communists were communists, and Chi-Coms are still communists. So this is a crazy sort of thing. So you probably have seen the picture of Blinken sitting there and going,
Yeah.
"Oh, so what's my point here? My point is that this is delusional. He actually believes that. And I think that Putin and his entourage can cannot escape also believing that. So what does that mean? That makes things very, very, very difficult, very, very volatile, because this guy still, if he remembers the numbers, has the codes for our nuclear arsenal. And
Mm,
the people advising him are not much brighter. I mean, they're more compass mentis, but they also have this exceptional stripe to them. Um, that's the deal. Let me just use one more example. Another, for instance, back in 2013, Obama was almost mousetrapped into making an overt war against Syria, like overt, like with our armed forces, right? Instead of with millions of dollars being channeled into moderate terrorists to challenge the Bashar al Assad regime. Long story short, there was a false flag attack outside of Damascus, immediately blamed on Bashar al Assad, who had no incentive to do that since he was winning, okay? And Obama was under this incredible pressure to start an overt war, to fling a lot of Tomahawk missiles off these ships in the Eastern Med at Syria. Now, to his credit, he didn't want to start another war. I mean, he had Iraq and he had Afghanistan behind him. He didn't want to do another one on Syria. By happenstance, he was due up at a G9 summit meeting in St. Petersburg. He goes up to talk to Vladimir Putin. And Putin says, "Look, Mr. President, we respect your reluctance to get involved in another war. Matter of fact, we're kind of thinking about protecting Bashar al Assad ourselves, but we don't want it to come to that. We got a deal for you." And Obama says, "What's that?" So we've talked to the Syrians. They're willing to get all their chemical weapons destroyed on a ship, U.S. ship, if you'll allow it, specifically outfitted for such destruction under UN supervision. You get them all destroyed. You don't have to make a war on Syria. And Obama says, "Really? John Kerry never told me about that." Putin, really? Watch the Syrian foreign minister tomorrow. Foreign minister makes a speech. "We're willing to give up all our existing chemical weapons under UN supervision to be destroyed on a U.S. ship outfitted for such destruction. We're willing to do that immediately." Okay. Wow. No war. There's a long story behind that, but my point is simply this, that because these two worked that stuff out, there was the apogee, there was the height of cooperation between Russia and the US not to start another war in the Middle East. What does that mean? Well, that means a hell of a lot. This is the point here. On the 12th of September 2013, just as this deal was being worked out and announced, the New York Times allowed Vladimir Putin to write an op-ed. Okay? And he wrote an op-ed. And what it said is, I value the increasing trust, the missing commodity today. Okay. I value the increasing trust, not only between our two countries, but personally, between President Obama and me, President Putin. We have prevented a war. I look forward to progressing in this direction. Mind you, September 12th, 2013. Last paragraph. I have only one problem with Mr. Obama. Last week, he bragged that the US was the sole exceptional country in the world. I, Vladimir Putin, do not agree. I think all nations, whatever their stage of development, some striving for democracy, some far away from democracy, I see that they are all equal. And when the good Lord looks down at them, he says, all these countries are equal, none are exceptional, period, end quote. I learned at the time that Putin penned that last paragraph all by himself, and confirmation came a year and a half later when some interviewer asked him out of the blue about this issue, and his words were virtually identical to what that last paragraph in the New York Times, New York Times said. Okay, what's my point? That was, again, September 12th, 2013. Okay, now, increasing trust? No, that's not what the neocons want. So what did they do? They redoubled their efforts to gin up the coup in Ukraine. So, December 2013, Victoria Nuland, Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, brags that we have invested $5 billion with a B dollars in Ukraine's aspirations to join the West. December 2013, February 2014, the coup in Kiev, a coup advertised 2.5 weeks before on YouTube, namely intercepted conversation between Victoria Nuland and the U.S. Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt in Kiev, saying, look, we're going to have this coup. Here are the guys that are going to come in, and here's Joe Biden going to help us solidify this thing. And when the U.S. Ambassador in Kiev said, yeah, well, what about the EU? They're not going to like this. And Victoria Nuland says, F, you know the last three letters, right? F the EU. And one reason we know this is the interceptor was quite authentic is because 3 days later, Victoria Nuland apologized, not for staging the coup, but for using the F word with respect to the EU. Now that appeared on YouTube on the 4th of February, 2014. The coup happened on the 22nd of February, 2014, and everything went shoo. No more trust. No more trust. Okay. So what I'm saying here is that this notion of U.S. indispensability, this whole thing is for the birds. Okay. Now I've been saying that Putin is right. Does that put me in Putin's pocket? No. It just means that I agree that Putin is right when he says the U.S. is not the indispensable or all-powerful country in the world. Okay. Now that I think is being brought out in many ways now with the division of the world between what I call the lily white West, embodied in NATO. Look at those countries. What do they all have in common? They're all white, Turks, a little bit people of color. But it's the lily white West against the rest of the world. Okay. Now talk about Russia being isolated. Forget about it. It's not Russia being. It's the lily white West, in essence, the leader, the exceptional one, the U.S. being isolated. Now, 80% of the rest of the world are people of color. They don't like what's going on in Ukraine, and they especially don't like what's going on in Gaza. And it's just a matter of time before Biden, Blinken, Sullivan, and Nuland sounds like reminds me of the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Remember that? The Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Okay. This law firm is going to learn a really bitter lesson, and I hope that it'll be learned without violence, without all the rest of us going down.
With that, I don't mean to wrap this up rather abruptly, but I have another show I have to get to. But that was a brilliant 90 minutes. And
Was it 90? Wow.
yeah, and it was, the less I talk tends to be the better of an episode it is, because it means I'm really listening, and I forget that I'm doing the show. But yeah, I mean, as an America loving guy, you do have to, if you truly love it, you have to look at it for its flaws and all, and examine those fearlessly. And I think that's what we did, or that's what you did to my benefit. But Mr. McGovern, I do have to wrap this one up again. I apologize for the rather abrupt ending. But guys, please go in the description. Please go to his website. I will email you this episode, and I look forward to our next talk, Mr. McGovern. Thank you for your time, and thank you for, really a brilliant episode.
Thanks for listening, as they say.
No, thank you, sir. That I genuinely appreciated that. That was perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Tommy. See you next time.
Mr. McGovern, thank you so much. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Till next